right, let's start. All right. Good afternoon. Thank you very much. Welcome, and also all those people online as well. First and foremost, I'd like to acknowledge traditional custodians of the lands and waterways in which we are passing. I'd like to thank elders past, present, and emerging, and those who are in the room and online. Thank you for your ongoing custodianship of the land and waterways here. And so without further ado, there is, sorry for those online, we're having a party here for here as well, we've got cakes and everything. I'll hand over to the Peace Director, Professor Rhonda Craven, to do the introductions for today's round.
Thank you, Vicky, and happy birthday to our lovely hero today. Every young hero forever young. Today we'd like to introduce our beloved Professor Pekrun, who, as you all know, is one of the world's foremost scholars in achievement motivation theory and the father of that theory, and an expert in emotions and how they're related to academic achievement and all sorts of other exciting things as well. I'm really interested in today's topic. I'm thinking there's going to be huge arguments, Reinhard, with this, overcoming fragmentation, why, when, and how should we integrate theories. How are you going to make Herb and Jana Marr and Rich Ryan integrate their theories? Well, I hope you're going to tell us, and I'm very excited. So I'm looking forward to the solution to that. So join me in welcoming Professor Pekrun.
Thank you so much, Rhonda, and it is a pleasure to have another opportunity to talk a bit about what we are thinking about in CVT research, but also what I'm going to talk about today is just a little bit broader and reflects upon these various complaints about fragmentation in psychology, but also in other disciplines, in physics, for example, in the sciences, right? And calls for integration, right? And what I mean by fragmentation is psychological science, but more specifically, I'm going to refer to motivation and emotion science, and after the recent discussions, we could add well-being science too, right? All right. Since the mid-19th century, you could say, and Ricky, I don't know, should we get into presentation?
That is presentation mode for this one.
Fragmentation, right? So, Kronbach talked about the two disciplines of scientific psychology that were drifting apart and would need to be reunified, and what he meant was correlation and experimental psychology. More recently, Jeff Green, ever-increasing number of theories of learning, little Fargus talk, integration or parsimony. Cognitive scientists get bigger and so I put it this way, concern about lack of integration has been voiced for years. The patchwork of theories resembles the political map of Germany and Italy between I from Germany. So this, to the extent, is representative here, mostly small and loosely related territories that occasionally battle but mainly ignore each other. And Al Skinner concluded, end users are faced with a splintered and confusing picture of academic motivation, and as such, calls for doing better, calls for integrating, right? Kathy Benson, an important challenge for research reform is to achieve greater parsimony across theoretical frameworks. And Alan Wickfield and Andy Elliott, what should the next steps be to make the field of motivation science stronger? For the field to advance, we think it is essential for the silos to be breached. But on the other hand, there are also quite a number of colleagues who at least appear to be content with the current situation, and we need to consider the costs may be high. It is effortful to integrate theories, and it may be difficult to get them accepted in the scientific community. So why exactly should we do that, integrating theories, right? And if so, under what conditions should we do it, and when should we better refrain from doing it? And if we want to do it, what are possible strategies, right? All right, so the first question, why should we? And I would agree, we do have a proliferation, and I think nobody would disagree with that, right? We do have a proliferation of constructs and of theories. And the research traditions addressing these constructs and theories are in a state of fragmentation. So I would say that is true. Too many constructs that address the same phenomenon. So Alan Skinner already in 1996, right, listed more than 100 constructs of subjective perceived control, right? We do have too many jingle-jangle fallacies. Jingle, the same term denotes different constructs. Intrinsic is a very good example for that. So in motivation science, typically relates to the inherent quality of the target object, right? So intrinsic motivation would be motivation to perform an action because of its inherent qualities, regardless of any outcomes. But in emotion science, it's using a different, I mean, related, but still really different way. Self-initiation, right? Intrinsic emotion regulation, the self regulates the emotion, and extrinsic would be other individuals regulate my emotions. And that's not good, right? Promotes misunderstandings. Jingle-jangle fallacies in jangle, different terms denoting the same construct, self-concept of ability, academic self-concept, competence, belief, perceived competence, right? And Herb and I, we try to disentangle some of that a bit, especially in relation to self-concept and self-efficacy. And obviously, colleagues are aware that there is an issue, right? So this article, 2019, it was published, received already more than 700 citations. Proliferation of theories. Let's start with motivation. Self-determination theory, very represented in IPPE. There is family of expectancy value theories von Jack Atkinson, Reinhard Pekrun, Jackie Eccles, right? Expected utility theories in economics, self-concept theories represented in IPPE. Higgins self-descriptive theory, achievement goal theories, need for achievement theories, Grant's motivational intensity theory, various theories of engagement, John Marshall-Rees theory of agentic engagement, right? Wickland's symbolic self-completion theory, theories of action control, Heckelson's Rubicon model, locus goal setting theory, Drake's mindset theory, various interest theories, various reward learning theories, various theories of motivation regulation and meta motivation, such as David Meade's and Chris Walsh's work, right? And similarly, in emotion, basic emotion theories, Paul Ekman, two-factor theory, Schachter and Singer, various apparent theories, attributional theories, Blumenstein's information gap theory, control value theory, are represented here in IPP, Kaltner's appraisal tendency framework, interference theory, attention control theory, Michael Isaac, proprioceptive, interoceptive feedback theories, Friston's predictive processing approach, embodiment theory, social constructivism, Russell's core affect framework, theory of constructed emotion, Lisa Barrett, trade safe theories, coping theories, Lazarus, Carver, and so on. James Gross's passes model of. So only reading these lists, and they are not complete, right, is really getting boring and tedious, right? At least for students, for our students, right? Okay. And definitely, I mean, these theories, to an extent, target different origins and outcomes, motivation, emotion, and there also definitely are differences in theoretical and meta-theoretical assumptions, but nevertheless, there are just large overlaps, right? And a lack of integration. There are silos of theories and research traditions, and I wonder if how ethnographers or science would represent that. So their perspective might be that these silos define territories that are entertained and defended by rivaling tribes of researchers, right? Some of them are really gangs. And this comes with the need to appear distinctive, even when assumptions are more similar than the protagonists want to admit. And the debate about constructivism in emotion science has been for the 100-year emotion war, right? And in fact, the protagonists in this war are pretty close conceptually, but won't admit it. All right. Fragmentation hinders the development of a robust cumulative body of evidence, right? And it also just impedes communication with practitioners. I mean, all the textbooks we are having presented another selection of constructs and theories, right?
And teachers just cannot deal with 100 overlapping constructs of control, right? And that's a toxic combination. Not really robust body of evidence in many subfields, right? And the lack of clear communication, and that undermines the use of what we are doing in practice, which implies action is needed. So I would agree with that. Action is needed, but I would say not at all costs. So the question is, when should we integrate theories and when should we rather refrain from doing that, right? And obviously, an integration requires that the theories target the same or at least related phenomena, and that the constructs and propositions of the theories converge. And that's a pretty strong requirement. Convergence calls for integration. If there's divergent integration, that still be possible under some conditions. So that is not always a stop sign. All right, constructs. This would be an example. Jackie Eccles has used self-concept items to conceptualize expectancy of success in the framework of her expectancy value theory. And Herb, you didn't really disagree with that. I don't know. That's a matter for discussion, right? To the extent that that makes sense conceptually, we could say, okay, let's merge academic self-concept and expectancy of success. I mean, I would have a little disagreement there, but that's the way research in EPT was going.
But that wasn't theoretical. That was empirical.
Okay. Okay. And I would say we really need to be cautious and attend to differences. So at surface level, for example, action control expectancy as it is used in control value theory and based on volition research, Julius Kuhl, Heinz Heckhausen in Germany and others in the US, is different from self-efficacy expectation. So action control would mean, for example, I'm able to invest the effort this afternoon to do my math homework for an hour. Self-efficacy would be, I will be able to successfully work on my math homework and solve the problems. And that is a subtle difference, but it is a difference, right? All right. Propositions, if they converge, integration would be possible. And this is a possible example here, self-concept theory, expectancy value theory. If there is divergence, we do have competition, we do have theoretical controversies. And there are two possible solutions. This discarding invalid theories, right? Or if the contradictory theories are partly valid, each of them, it might be possible to specify under what conditions each of them holds and then integrating them in broader theories. So theoretical controversy has been proposed to be a prime driver of development by philosophers of science. They neglected, by and large, theoretical integration, right? But I would say it's largely lacking in our field, with a few exceptions. So I wouldn't see any major contradictions between self-determination theory, self-concept theory, expectancy value theories, and control value theory, which has the advantage it's possible to integrate, at least in principle, right? But the disadvantage may also be a lack of theoretical progress. Why? Why do we have a lack of theoretical controversies? And I'm not the only one thinking that that is so. And one possible reason is that our theories lack precision and explanatory power. And these are four options for propositions that differ in terms of power. First level non-causal, A is associated with B, such as self-concept correlates with achievement. Second one, causal effect, but a weak statement. A has an effect on B, self-concept has an effect on achievement. Causal moderately strong, a positive effect on achievement. And the stronger version would be A has a functionally specified effect on B, for example, a quadratic effect. And obviously, level one statements, A is associated with B, they are almost always true. So next to no falsifiability. And as Neil put it in his presidential address in the 60s, the point null hypothesis in psychology is quasi always false. So that this doesn't lead us anywhere, right? Levels 2 and 3 statement A has an effect on B, either the direction specified or not. Stronger, but the falsifiability is still relatively low. There are not many empirical cases that are excluded, right? And level number 4, functionally specified effects, is doing better in that respect. Stronger falsifiability, right? So most theories in motivation science, the same is true with a few exceptions for emotion, do not move beyond the third level. So verbal statements defining direction of effects, but not their functional form. And I'm convinced that it makes sense too. That would not solve all problems, right? But that would be an important direction to move beyond that level and more formally specify the functional form of relations. And the value of that can be seen from other disciplines, right? If you look into the sciences without the form position of Newtonian physics, it would not have been possible to detect that the Newtonian model is not able to fully explain the motion of planets, right? And Einstein would not have developed his relativity theory. Or similar decision making. Without the formal precision of expected utility value, theories, behavioral economists would not have detected that humans do not behave in the same way, same rational way as predicted by these models, and Kahneman would not have won a Nobel Prize based on his passing theory. So we need more precision, and which would make it easier to detect divergence between theories, also easier to detect divergence between theories and reality, but it will also make it harder and at the same time potentially more fruitful to integrate theories. Okay, if you want to do that, what are possible strategies? And that follows from, in a way, from what I just said. We will need to integrate constructs, we will need to integrate propositions. For integrating constructs, they need to be clearly defined and sufficiently similar. There have been rules developed in the literature, specifically from personality science, for the similarity of constructs, and for example, Lawson and Rowan's, this can be based on the similarity of normal definitions of nomological networks and empirical relations. And constructs that target the exact same phenomena, they call them twin constructs, should be possible to just integrate them, right? And academic self-concept expectancy of success could be considered by some as a case in point. And Herb, I did already hear that you would disagree. I would disagree too. But we would disagree, right? Anyways, constructs that target similar phenomena, they call them sister constructs. It would be possible to integrate them using superordinate umbrella terms. They call them parent constructs, while keeping the original constructs for more nuanced description, such as action control and self-efficacy expectations, right? In CVT research, we are using this umbrella definition strategy to integrate different kinds of causal expectancies and attributions under the umbrella of control, and different kinds of value appraisals under the umbrella of value. So control, a general definition across sciences, could be A exerts a causal influence on B, right? And using this as an umbrella, expectancy, causal attribution, certainly coping potential, agency, accountability, and so on. So there's so many related appraisal dimensions that are listed in appraisal theories that can be integrated using such an umbrella conception. And this would be a more dynamic view how CVT is doing that. There is a process. The self is generating an action. The action produces outcomes that can be sequentially organized. Alternatively, situational forces generate outcomes, right? And we can organize different expectancies, forward expectancies, and backward causal attributions along the sequence. So this would be forward action control expectancy. I'm able to generate this action, right? And internal attribution of the action to my own intention. We're pretty close to the concept of autonomous motivation in SDT. Similarly, value, goal, relevance, goal, conduct, importance, significance, pleasantness, and so on, all these different concepts of value. CVT is using this taxonomy here to organize them, distinguish between positive and negative values, the value of activities and the value of outcomes, and then intrinsic and extrinsic values within these categories. And for example, value concept from other theories can be mapped onto this taxonomy. For example, if you take J.P. Eccles, this would be intrinsic value, this would be utility value. Here might be attainment value, although that is a bit more specific, and costs are located here. Okay, but we also need to consider that it depends on the purpose of communication. Terms are concepts about communication, right? So the best strategy may depend on the purpose. And as Darwin put it, for scientific discourse, it may be better to be a splitter than a lumper. So attending to the nuances of different positions. And I had a conversation with Rich about that, and he would share that perspective. In contrast, for communication with practitioners, umbrella terms can be really useful. So expected success, perceived control, self-concept, self-efficacy, and so on. Why not use talking to a teacher, but self-confidence, right? Student self-concept, the teacher's own self-confidence. Okay, constructs, requirements for integrating propositions. The construct will need to be clearly defined, but the relations between constructs would also need to be clearly specified. And then it's possible to integrate propositions if the constructs, all the relations are shared. And these are 6 possible cases here. Identical effects, 2 theories using different wording, both of them stating A influences B. That would be just an integrated theory, A influences B. Reciprocal effects, A influences B, B influences A. So there's reciprocal effects linking the two. A chain of effects, A influences B, B, C. So A influences B, influences C, and B would be immediate. And joint causes, both A and B influence C, A, B influence C. Joint outcomes, A influences both B and C. But we could also have more comprehensive theories that integrate smaller theories by proposing new effects. A influences B, C influences D, but at the same time, A has an effect on C and B has an effect on D, for example. These are examples, and this would be, again, I mean, self-concept and expectancy to the extent that they could be considered the same. This would be an integrated proposal here. Self-concept / expectancy influence achievement. Reciprocal effects, the classic example, self-enhancement and skill development theory and self-concept research, right? And Herb then proposed the reciprocal effects model for self-concept. They are linked by effects in both directions. Similarly, emotion research, specifically so at the time, research on anxiety, interference theory and deficit theory. Interference theory told us anxiety prompts taskful and thinking, thereby reducing achievement, right? Anxiety causes poor achievement. Deficit theory, the other way around. Anxious students lack ability and are prone to fail, and therefore they are afraid to test the exact opposite. Poor achievement then generates anxiety, right? And this can, in a similar way, than just by integrated by reciprocal effects model, which I then proposed at approximately the same time as Herpes self-concept, right? All right, chain of effects, for example, achievement goals, control value theory, achievement goals shape emotions, emotions influence performance, and as such, we developed a model where achievement goals affect emotions that in turn impact performance, and emotions will be the mediator. Joint causes, different positive emotions influencing well-being, and then there could be subsumed under the construct of positive affect. Joint causes, expectancy of success in various shaping motivation, expectancy of control and values, positive emotions, and so we had an attempt expectancies in various then impacting both motivation and prospective emotions, right? So expectancy value theory, control value theory are pretty close conceptually, which makes it easier. Joint outcomes, for example, in parts of the literature, effects of both on intrinsic motivation, in other parts, extrinsic motivation, then could be positive influence students' overall motivation. New effects, no, I do not know, Emma, if you would like that or Rich would like it. It doesn't, we didn't, I mean, we would need to talk about the details, right? So SDT, basic needs, shape, human motivation and action, right? Expectancy value theory, expectancy and task value, but definitely basic needs inform subjective values. So the two could be linked within such a framework here. So there are many options to integrate theories, and all of what I said obviously was simplified just for the purpose of demonstration, right? There are definitely many benefits of integration, not only when talking to practitioners, but there's all these different calls for integration, starting with Lee Cronbach in the 50s, just with very little success. The question is why, and it is at least in part because of the many obstacles on the way to integration. It's difficult to do it properly, not just on a surface level, right? It's effortful. It may just be easier to develop a new theory, right, and get it published. There's theoretical egocentrism. So this quote here, so Walter Mischel quoted it. He didn't say it himself, but he quoted it in a way that he was subsequently considered his own wording. Psychologists tend to treat other people's fears like toothbrushes. No self-respecting person wants to use another one else's, right? We do have the opinion power of leading theorists, editors, right? Silos have motivational power. Once you are in a silo and became a member of the gang, it's so much easier to stay in, and there's so much reinforcement as compared with making an attempt to break out, right? And there's a lack of incentives for integrated work and a trend just toward further proliferation. Once you have been able as a young scholar to attach your name to a new theory that you were able to publish, great, right? Integration, I don't know. Okay. But there are also possible remedies. So why not inaugurating that has not yet really happened in psychology, consensus conferences on constructs and measures, but other disciplines are doing that, and they are doing it really successfully. And that's true, for example, for clinical medicine and also for psychiatry, right? Why not psychology doing that in a similar way? Multi-lab strategies could be helpful. We could change editorial policies. This did already start, so there have been many calls for integration and many special issues recently over the past 3-4 years, right? And we could also amend our criteria for promotion and tenure in creating incentives for integrative work. Okay, I could stop at this point, and in fact, we know it's running out of time. But I wanted to also say there are caveats, right? There are caveats. We shouldn't be too euphoric about integration. It is not a panacea. There are paradoxical side effects, possibly so. And we need to consider, we also need to differentiate theories in many cases, and we need further theoretical development. Side effects, multiplication of theories and loss of explanatory power. So for example, in her review article, Skinner from 23 listed 9 motivational theories, and based on that list, Daniel Dinsmore integrated 3 of these theories. Martin and Sayers' approaches to learning, Pat Alexander's model of domain learning, and Fulvini and Ellison Hatton's model of self-regulated learning. Now, if each integrative theory addresses 3 of these 9 theories, we would have 84 possible combinatorial frameworks. And as they were proposed, for example, in this special issue in Educational Psychology Review, they continue to exist in addition to the single theories they're built upon. So we would overall then have 91 theories rather than only 9. An explosion, right? So an expansion of the universe of theories rather than a reduction of complexity. So the condition for this really to be successful is that the scientific community integrates accepts such an integrative theoretical approach, right? And implying that it that replaces the single theories. So we also thought that the self-concept RAM replaced self-and skill development approaches, and the emotion RAM replaced separate deficit and appearance approaches. But we learned recently, Herb and his group, including me and Fernando and Jesse and Fernando Nunez from France, and Jesse and Oliver Lübke from Germany. Sometimes the dead rise again. So there's a colleague from Sweden who has been writing a strong attack on the self-concept by telling us it's only one way. It's a unidirectional effect of achievement on self-concept period. Self-concept is not having any impact on students' learning and performance. Really. And there were several rounds. You can read it in education psychology. Several rounds. So there was a series of attacks. We wrote a series of rejoinders. The last one was just accepted for publication. Our hope at present still is that that was the last work, but God knows. Okay. So that's the requirement. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. Explanatory power. If we merge constructs that are not functionally homogeneous relative to origins and outcomes, then that doesn't make much sense either, right? So we have stable task general self-concept, for example, math self-concept, and on the other hand, situation, task-specific efficacy expectation, merging them into one construct, given the differences in origins and outcomes, would just blur the differences, wouldn't make too much sense, right? Or similarly, emotions, anger and fear, both are unpleasant, both are activating, but the origins and outcomes differ. They have different effects on behavior and performance. And if we integrate them into such a concept of negative affect, then that blurs the differences in terms of at least differential effects. Second point, often we need theoretical differentiation rather than integration. In terms of constructs, and this is what I just cited, affect would be an integrative construct that is for some purposes really useful, but for many, many other purposes, and especially as an explanatory construct, it is too broad. You need to differentiate between activating and deactivating emotions, which then is combined with positive, negative, the circumplex, right? But we also need to distinguish between discrete emotions within each of the quadrants of the circumplex, and anger and fear are a classic example, both activating, both negative, but very different effects, right? Different functional relations across levels of observation, single students, teachers, classes, schools, the level of regions, the level of countries, right? And also different functional relations potentially so across different time scales. So anxiety and achievement can be linked by positive feedback loops short term, negative feedback loops long term. And we are just in the starting to understand these differences in relations across different timescales, and here we really need differentiation. And we need new developments to overcome stagnation. It makes sense to attend to neighboring disciplines, economics, decision making, cognitive and affective neurosciences. We need, as I said, to develop formalized theories that can build on existing theories. So I made an attempt, and I talked about that in October, to build a formalized model of perspective emotions in the context of CVT. And also we also need, there has been tremendous progress the past 5-6 years especially, but still we need process in our statistical theories. So how would we model granular processes across 1,000 different single seconds, right? And how would we model processes across different timescales? Hammaker has made a first attempt in that direction in terms of, more elaborate measurement burst design. We need dynamic systems modeling beyond DSEM and network modeling. So there's much to do ahead, which would then really be due also from a statistic modeling perspective. So the conclusion would be to overcome theoretical stagnation, we need both wise integration, right? and new developments. And this is what we're trying to do in CVT research. So I talked about umbrella appraisals for control and value. In terms of origin, TBT integrates propositions from appraisal theories, attribution theories, and a number of anxiety theories. Herb and I developed this small scale, but still happy fish little pond effect model by integrating propositions from self-concept theory and control value theory. Andy and I achieving goals and emotions. In terms of outcomes, the CVT model of effects on performance integrates propositions from motivational, cognitive, and performance-oriented models. Emotion regulation, we developed an integrated model of achievement emotion regulation. More recently, I developed a model, I talked about that in Singapore to an extent that also considers the SDT concept of emotional integration. We developed a control value intervention that includes components from existing approaches. There are new developments in terms of formalization, in terms of theory about function relations across different timescales. And especially thorny issue is which of the basic mechanisms that we propose in our theories, and that's true for self-concept, self-determination, control value theory, are really universal, and which ones are specific and sensitive to social cultural context, and which combinations are specific and responsive in that way. If you want to read more about the most recent developments in CVT, these are two articles here, and some of what I talked about today, overcoming fragmentation, has already been published in this educational psychology review piece here. Thanks for your attention.
That mindset theory is called theory, strikes me as like CBT is clearly a theory, SDT is clearly a theory, social cognitive theory is clearly a theory. Mindset is a model at best and a hypothesis at worst. Don't you think the use of the word theory is too light? We need better criteria for it.
Yes, I think so. And I think so because the term acquired some dignity in some of the sciences.
Yes.
And psychology, I mean, all of the past 150 years was always striving to become a science in a similar way as the sciences are sciences,
yes.
right? And here we go. Yeah.
A theory in physical
Absolutely.
silence is not a hypothesis. It is testable, empirical. It explains how, it explains why. It's not a hypothesis. And I feel like in psychology, we think a hypothesis is a theory. People say that, other theory, and it's like a notion.
Yeah.
But too light in the word in the use of the word theory. We need, you should write something about like, because that could be a part of integration, like grounds upon which you can meaningfully integrate. Like mindset could easily be a part of social cognitive theory. It could be easily integrated there. And because you can evaluate it as not having all the basic component parts of more comprehensive theory, it's good grounds upon which you can incorporate it in something else.
I agree, absolutely. Yeah. But I mean, even if you do that, we would still have this, we would need to integrate. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
The process of integration, for sure.
Yeah, perfect.
I fear that when you integrate theory, you come up with such an amorphous generalizations that it doesn't have much value and that you lose the specificity. And in some cases, that specificity is appropriately lost, but in many cases is not. And you look at that in terms of constructs, with jingle jangle and stuff like that, but the same would hold true for theories as well. And it would seem to me that some of the integration that you're talking about wouldn't do justice to any of the theories that you're integrating.
Yeah, but that was not the kind of integration that I meant. And I mean, I talked about that here in terms of paradoxical side effects. Reduce explanatory power, right? And that's what would need to be avoided. And as long as that is not the case,
It's inevitable.
no, it's not. No, it's not. Come on. Okay. let us take self-enhancement and skill development. I mean, you integrated them pretty well in your RAM. There was no loss of explanatory power.
But I put them together. I didn't integrate them. I just.
Putting that together wasn't integration also because you tested them, you developed a statistical model, you tested them together and. Oh,
Okay, so I took two theories and put them together, but not in a way that integrated one into the other or vice versa.
no, they were integrated,
Together.
keeping their explanatory level.
Okay,
So they were neighbors, they were so one is here, the other one is sitting there, and they were integrated this way. Okay, you can have a theory here and a smaller theory here, and they integrate upward. Yeah, that would be another case. And what Emma just talked about could be reframed that way.
well, what Emma was talking about,
But I guess what-
part of what you should do is define the minimum criteria of what constitutes a theory, and then you would get rid of half of your theories.
That is true at any rate. That is true at any rate.
Next paper, next
And
paper.
I mean, I didn't want to offend
That's
anybody.
right.
So, Marshall,
I will look into the future for you. Integration needs a common language. And the psychology of motivation and emotion do have a common language. They just don't use it. It's neuroscience. Patterns of neural activity can fully explain jingle jangle patterns. Whether self-concepts and expectancy of success have the same neural pattern, it does functionally the same thing. So in 15 years, if we use more and more neuroscience, we'll resolve all this. In fact, theories may even disappear.
Is functionally the same thing always the same in terms of predictive utility, like in terms of outcome? If they
For
were,
neuroscience,
Yeah.
I've talked to a lot of these neuroscience, who want to replace motivation altogether, by the way, motivation theories.
Sure.
It's the same thing.
Just,
The same way it is for like a medical doctor. Medical doctors don't need theories.
no,
They just need to understand the process by which they work.
but John Marshall, there's a caveat here, that's reductionism. So in principle, you could say, okay, what about all these interactions and collaboration between brain networks, right? We should go to the level of cells. And some of the amygdala research are really very successfully doing that today. But then the area research could certainly should go down to the level of molecules, and then down to the level of protons and
That's
sparks
the
and so on.
explanatory model. though.
So that doesn't make too much sense. So it depends on, the level of the phenomena that we want to explain. I mean, let's say a theory of economics at a country level. How is economic growth, decline, and so on developing globally across different countries? The neuroscientific approach would not have much to contribute to that because it's just different levels of explanation. Or if you want to explain events in history, right, wars in history, neuroscience, there are limits. So there's big promise, right? We start understanding our brains.
Don't attack neuroscience, attack the
Joseph.
common language.
I need to.
all right, Joseph,
I mean, I think there is a fundamental philosophical assumption underlying all of this work, right? It's like an elemental realist or mechanistic idea that you can divide the world up into elements, specify the causal parts, and if you can eventually figure out how this giant machine works, you'll have it sorted. But the problem is that words like self-concept, unlike in the physical sciences, don't refer to something concrete like chair. There's no correspondence to the physical realm. Like they've spent billions of dollars trying to say, let's have the neural correlates of DSM disorders. And it just wasted that money. They haven't found it. Because what depression means to you is different from what it means to me. So the first problem I see is that the philosophical assumption that they're discrete elements. And we can define, the problem is everybody's disagreeing on elements. And you don't have, and if I say this, no, this is a chair, we can all agree, whatever word you use, it refers to this. If he says self-concept and you say self-concept, they could be different things entirely.
I agree in principle, but the problem is that the concept of chair is similarly having very, very open boundaries. And the best way to do that would be to say there's a prototype of this being a chair, and then there's a family of objects, and some that
Yeah.
start to resemble tables. So
But there's some things
whatever.
separate from the words. There's some things separate from the word, you can say that, there's not, if I say depression, it's, what Ricky says is depression, I can't find it separate from that word, from his interpretation of that meaning, so.
Yeah, okay, but I mean, okay, there would be a distinction between concrete and abstract constructs, right? But then you make it dependent on human perception, so I'm not so sure. I mean, if I'm thinking about biology, species in biology since Darwin are no longer considered as considered discrete categories having clear boundaries. The boundaries between species are fluid, and it's more populations of, let's say,
Sure,
shares.
but don't you think there's something fundamentally in graph versus academic sub-concept, like there's something much more amorphous that allows people to come up with their own constructs and theories, because we're all looking at different parts of the world. You want to look at the neurobiology, you know, you want to look at cognition and affect. Another person wants to focus on motivation, and we're at different levels, where some people are at the social level, they don't even care. You know, they want to look at family systems. And so you've got this problem of an infinite number of labels, and it could go on forever.
I remember a recent discussion I had with an oncologist who was doing research on various types of tumors. And he explained to me to what extent during the past 10 years, definition of tumors have changed because of, I mean, these just fluid boundaries between different types of tumors. And this is something you can perceive and say, this is a tumor, you analyze it.
Yeah.
Okay, those are the means.
But what if, okay, so let me give you another example, like, because the elemental realism, okay, so that's one philosophical worldview, but I mean, I feel like STD seems to be pulled into this world, but actually STD is an organicism or a growth-based model. So the question they ask are completely different. It's like, we assume we're not looking to explain the entire world. We want to know what optimizes growth. It's a completely different question. It's like the human is intact, whole, and complete, and okay. And so if something's going wrong, something's stopping growth. So it's a very different philosophical worldview than how do you explain the machine. And it leads to different kinds of theories, and I don't know if they can necessarily be integrated.
But I mean, even in SDT, you need to define categories, right? And SDT distinguishes between 3 human needs. So, and they're defined in a way that some, I mean, the individual needs fall into one category and others in another category. And then they are linked because they do something.
Yeah,
With subsequent action and growth.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't see any fundamental difference, let's say, between reserve historical one in terms of SARS concept or B in terms of emotions and basic assumptions of SDT. There's a normative component, growth is good, right? And flourishing, living up to one's potential. But in terms of the categories, which is not here, would really be interesting. I mean, there are mechanisms assumed in SDT.
There is, I guess.
Even in the terms for motivation dimensions, right? Interjected, identified, there's a process, a mechanism, even in the definition of the category, right? So,
But what,
I mean,
but I think JMR is going to be uninterested in a lot of stuff based on his worldview, because he's really interested in the constructs that help growth. So, like, it's not that he just, I'm guessing, JMR, that you would be interested in integrating some theories because it's just not relevant to your goals.
I'm interested in a subclass of motivational constructs, needs, not necessarily cognitions and emotions, needs. So that limits me. I'm not interested as much in mindset and stuff like that. Not over the cover. Agree with that.
There's other, you had one. Did you have a question? Okay, in the conversation, this morning, there was, an article on the history of the term trauma. And, historically, it was only physical. And then William James made it psychological, but it was still fairly tightly constrained and defined by the professionals. And then it became into public use, and now it means almost anything. And so part of the problem that we have in psychology and but for psychology in particular, is that we want our our constructs to have meaning that people can understand, and as soon as they do that, they pervert them, and so that they blow out and they no longer have any meaning. So if we didn't use such interesting labels for our, if we call them X, Y, Z, instead of self-concept or something like that, we could have control over it. But of course, that's not what we want to do. We want our terms to be popular. Also, in relation to the reduction to neurology, neurophysiology and reductionism, almost 100 years of attempts to do that with anxiety have failed. And it's clear that psychological anxiety is different than physiological anxiety. And so you're not actually going to ever totally reduce them.
Well, the neuroscience would say then you've got such a fuzzy concept, it's not really useful.
That's different. We're not talking about, useful to a whole nother game.
Yeah, but I mean, so more recently, I mean, there's intense neuroscientific research on fear conditioning and the feedback loops and sustaining fear related to specific objects, right? And they are pretty far advanced in finding out where the engrams for fear and the connection between objects and fear are located in the brain. I mean, projections from some parts of the prefrontal lobe to the hypothalamus and to the amygdala and Bergen. And at present, I mean, I would agree that the main advance they provide for us is that we can better understand what happens if something is wrong with the container, right? Problems, neurological problems. The non-pathological case, John Marshall, you would need to provide cases.
Just
Teresa.
fundamentally, what would help me to better like grasp all of this is a better distinction of what's a construct, what's a model, and what's a theory. Because sometimes when you spoke about integrating theory, you then used the reciprocal effects model as an example, which is actually just a process and a model that was integrated into being reciprocal. But it wasn't, as Herb pointed out, he wasn't integrating the theories. He was just using models from both theories and integrating those. And so similar for self-determination theory, for example, I sometimes use something that looks like the dual process model, but I'm not actually using the theory and integrating the theory per se. I'm using the model and I'm integrating that with the model from another theory. So
Yeah.
I'm using the
Yeah, yeah.
theories, but I'm not integrating them.
Yeah, absolutely. And but the problem there, that would be another talk. I mean, in let's say philosophy finds that different definitions of theory and different definitions of model, and they make the two closer or less similar, right? And I use the term theory here in a generic sense.
We've got another question as well.
Alex?
I had 40 minutes.
Yeah.
You're all right.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I really enjoyed it. I have a medical background.
Uh-huh.
And I what you said could resonate with me. Now, I wonder if the problem or the challenge starts a step before going into theories. I believe field of psychology is very fragmented into epistemological approaches. So post-positivistic research is only focusing on post-positivistic research, and a lot of research is only focusing on constructivist epistemological approaches. And I feel like once this divide is made, then this further divides and fragmentations. And in the medical world, we have one truth, and that is if the cellular process leads to this outcome, then that's the truth. No matter how the patient is feeling, that is the truth for us. And I wonder if that would be something to consider, whether it's in the scope of the paper or advancing theories, where we try to integrate post-positivistic and constructivist approaches, or researchers in your field start to discuss how no matter what the different truths are, this is what we take as a given in this post-positivistic epistemological approach.
All right, but there's just one problem in how you describe a possible strategy, and that is how do you define the outcome? And there are the problems you just listed, right, are reflected in conceptual definitions of the outcome and then also operational definitions of the outcome. You don't get rid of the problem that way. There is no defined outcome in medicine, right? That would be, I mean, universally accepted and not be controversial.
I dare to disagree because you get an outcome based on the examinations, whether that is invasive or non-invasive.
Yes, but then you run into exactly what we just talked about, depression. Let's say if the outcome should be absence of depression, how do you find depression in the first place?
I mean,
You don't get rid of the problems, and the same the true for I mean even really hard wired kind of physiologically hard like things like a tumor.
see the difference because of course the WHO has a certain standard, but then if we look international level, Australia uses a different standard for infectious diseases, for example, compared to the Netherlands or Germany.
Yeah.
I see that's a difference. But I feel like at the micro level, it all starts with the same base.
Not really. I mean, if you look into the development of definitions of depression over the different versions of the DSM over the years, and to what extent that was driven by the business industry wanting to sell their pharmaceutical goods, I'm no longer so sure. So.
Probably at the time, is there any other final questions, final remarks? Rhonda?
Reinhard, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. Guys, it's something for you all to think about with your PhDs. Like I'd be pretty scared to try and integrate theories right at the moment after watching some of our professors battle it out today with what they think about, you know, integration, with what Reinhard has said too about, you know, the need to be cautious when you're doing that. So, you know, not to go blindly there on doing it. And I suggest you all take a look at this paper and quote it extravagantly in your work to justify whichever way you're going to go and what you're going to do. As always, Reinhard, a privilege and a pleasure to have a leading researcher in the world speak to us, and very entertaining for me to watch you get the professoriate really riled. That was great fun. Please join me in thanking Professor Pekrun. And thanks everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you everyone online as well. Thank you for the discussion.
Actually,